Hi, I'm Seamless, and today I want to talk to you about writing beats. And when I say beats, what I'm specifically referring to is drum beats and the kinds of drum beats that are particularly simplistic in this case. We're talking about sort of cardinal beats because it's really only so many, and it's really kind of your job to sort of find variation and uniqueness in between them and to make things interesting. Um, this is going to be a bit of a different tutorial just because most of the other things I talk about, especially about sound design and sort of mixing and that kind of thing, I talked about so many times that I have an incredibly well rehearsed spiel prepared. But for beats, it's not a thing I talk about very often. And the reason why I don't talk about it very often is because it's usually the thing that people figure out how to do first. And honestly, it's because of all the things that you do in just about any kind of genre of music, it's usually the easiest thing to do. And that's exactly what happened to me when I first started out producing. I couldn't do sound design for shit. I used presets for everything, but I did drums. I did drums really, really well. And so really what's going to happen is I'm just going to kind of go over like a couple of basic regular beats and then also explain a little bit about timing and a tiny bit of theory in terms of just what notes are, that kind of thing. So let's start off with this. Because we're in a grid and we're in a MIDI piano roll, it's a little bit difficult. I mean, we can't. It's a bit weird to think of stuff in their sort of sheet music notation, but we're still going to be using that kind of terms. So, in the sheet music, this would be a whole note, and it's called the whole note. A whole note. It's the whole note. It's called the whole note because it sleeps around. Nope, it's called the whole note because it's the entire length of a measure. In this case, the measure is 4 beats, and we're in a time signature of 4/4. The 4/4 in the time signature means that it's 4 beats of quarter notes. So it's 4 fourth notes, essentially. A quarter note is 1/4 of essentially the measure, although this can be a little bit different of a 4/4 measure anyway, because you could have 6/4, and then that's 6 quarter notes, even though a whole note is actually still a whole measure. It's a bit weird. But because most of the time you're going to be working at 4/4, and if you're venturing into other time signatures, I really hope you figured out 4/4 beforehand. Beforehand. Derp. So many puns. Yeah, so quarter note, and then, 8th note, 16th note, 32nd note, that whole thing. That's relatively self-explanatory. And it's so kind of weird ones like this one. This is a dotted 8th note. And the dotted, whenever you hear dotted 8th, dotted 16th, that kind of thing, that is the note length that it's supposed to be. So dotted 8th would be an 8th note plus 1/2 of the length. So that would be a 16th note, creating the length of what would be a dotted 8th note. That exists for all the other ones as well, like dotted quarter and that kind of thing. I guess dotted half is a thing. That's a little bit weird, but whatever. So now when I say that writing beats is among one of the easier things to do, it's because if you have any kind of concept of time at all, just listening to a beat is usually enough for people to figure out how to do it. Obviously, I'm not going to say everyone knows how to do that. If you can't do it, you're dumb, because, whatever, people are different. But that's usually how you kind of, learn that kind of thing. I happen to also, before I ever even touched a DAW, I had piano lessons for like 10 years. So I had a lot of training in terms of like metronomes and timing and that kind of thing. And my dad's a drummer, so like beats are something that came particularly naturally to me. But what you really want to do is, like, if you're listening to a song, you want to count yourself 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and like you're counting the beats of the measure. And the reason we're doing this is not because we want to, make it, if we're making house, then like that's obviously all you need to do. But if we're trying to figure out a more intricate beat that might have something a bit more interesting going on, then we're gonna want to be counting. Am I in triplets right now? I'm not, but I don't need to be in 1/4. There we go. Some kind of more interesting beat, then we're gonna want to know how to count divisions so that when we hear it, we can identify what those divisions are. I'm putting together a pretty regular looking beat right here. And all right, so like there's a bunch of sort of interplay with the notes here, and there's a concept called syncopation. There's also a concept called polyrhythm. I'm not doing polyrhythm right now, but I am kind of syncopating. Don't really worry about that. Syncopation really just means you're playing a rhythm against a different rhythm, and a polyrhythm is where you're playing like a wholly different kind of counting against another wholly different kind of counting. So like you'd be playing like the regular beat in 4/4, and then the rest of the beat in like 7/8 or something, and then they repeated and overlapped. That's what polyrhythm is. So you could just say that the rhythm repeats and overlaps. The terminology is not super important when it comes to sort of drum stuff, because it's honestly the most effective way to learn this kind of stuff is just to learn how to hear it and then not worry about talking about it. So when you hear a beat like this, you have the metronome on. There's a bunch of ways that teachers, like theory teachers, and also like my piano instructor, like to train people to. Wow, I just realized that the woman who taught me how to play piano is probably dead right now. She was really old when she started teaching me. That's incredibly sad. I'll have to go look into that. Anyway, so the way that we count, it's like we count the main beats, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then. But like that's not all the divisions there is. There's still more divisions, and so we divide it by a half again. And that's where we throw in things like 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and that kind of thing. I really hope my voice is in sync, otherwise it would seem really stupid. But say 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and then there's even one more for even more of a division. That's when we go 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a. And that's where you're counting 16th notes. 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a. And the reason why we're doing this is because we're identifying in our brains like a definition for a particular part of a beat. And the purpose of this, of that, so many purposes, layers of purposes, is that when we hear a thing, we can tell where it is. And of course, we can also get used to like what particular divisions sound like. So like if we do, for example, this business, where we have dotted eighths, and we kind of do one of these. This is an extraordinarily common sort of syncopation that occurs, often also melodically. That's just all over the place. And if we're able to sort of count, like you say, okay, go this 1, and then on the of like 1 E and of 1, and then on the and of 2. So when people say like the and of 2, they're talking about in the middle of the second beat. That's sort of what they mean. This is a little bit like scale degree jargon when someone's like the 1, the 3, the 9, and then the added and that kind of thing. Now we're talking about the 1 and the 2 and the 3 and the 4, and that's what drummers talk about. That's what their 1, 2, 3, and 4 is. Yeah. Now, it's like for that other beat that I had in sort of normal world beat like this. Actually, let's do something even more normal. Straight hats. Whatever. Anyway, like doing that. Basically, your typical drum and bass beat right there. But when you hear a beat like this, you really just want to map it out in your brain about where the hits land, and like the especially this particularly basic drum and bass beat. That's really just this. The whole business here is that this beat is on the and of 3 as opposed to just on 3, as if this were a house beat where everything is kind of together. Of course, if you're doing house stuff, then it's not really that important. Like sort of being able to visualize beats and understanding like what different beats sound like, much like the sort of the ear training that you do with music theory, where you're able to identify intervals so that you can hear melodies and you can tell what's happening. If you're familiar with like the basic kind of beats, that you can hear beats, and then when you hear sort of variations that sound particularly cool inside music, you can understand the timing of it, and you can understand how that's made. This is a particularly important exercise when we're talking about fills. And I guess we're talking about writing fills. Fills, like, it's not, I mean, there are a couple of sort of easy ones where we're just kind of do. Like, really straightforward. Let's actually do. Yeah. That kind of deal. And honestly, the best way I could think of to like familiarize yourself with fills, you can either just, I mean, most people just kind of put stuff down until it sounds good. You saw me doing that when I was doing the drum and bass beat, where I was screwing around with the 4 and like the 4 snare hits in the middle, and like which ones had the accent and whatever. I mean, either one would work, but you have to test these things and just figure out which works. And in the future, when you decide to do it yourself, you could be like, okay, now I get it. But in sort of the real world, when drummers practice, they kind of start with the simple stuff, and then they sort of throw curveballs at it. They kind of alter the timing of particular hits and add in other hits, and faster and that kind of thing. And if you really want to get familiar with writing fills and stuff like that, you probably want to study what real drummers do. And it's not really because I like real drummers are better at writing beats, although usually they're more familiar with that. But they are much better at writing sort of drummer-centric beats, which a lot of fills that we're used to hearing are. And what I mean by used to hearing, I mean that your idea of a fill, your idea of like a nice beat in a nice motion is developed just like regular music from the stuff you listen to all your whole life. And chances are the kind of fills you're used to hearing were at one point in time recorded by real drummers. This is super helpful because then, like, when you, like, especially for like metal, if you go watch any metal video, just kind of watch what drummers do. They come up with some really sick ass fills, and it's pretty great if you just kind of use that and you focus on it to determine sort of a map, if you will, of where you want to put toms, stuff like that. If you do study drummers, especially metal drummers, you might find this kind of fill familiar. I just turned on triplets because what happens sometimes is what they'll do a 1-2 hit, and then the third one, 1-2 hit, the third one, 1-2 hit. They're basically doing triplets with 2 hits on a hit, toms, and then 2 hits on a kick. This gives a particularly interesting illusion where it sounds like you're machine gunning a kick drum. Even though we're hitting the kick drum 3 times, even though I totally garbled how it's supposed to go. Which is pretty fun. And then sometimes if they're particularly advanced, what they'll do is they'll do doubles. They'll do 2 hits on a tom and then 2 hits on the kick drum because they'll have a double kick pedal. Starting to sound familiar? And that might actually, to you, you might have thought to yourself, well, that sounded a bit robotic. And there's a sound design aspect to the samples and stuff you're using. I'm using Superior Drummer right now just because it's just a basic kind of kit. But if I want to make it sound a bit more natural, beyond sort of timing, I could also mess around with velocity layering and leveling, that kind of thing. Because a real drummer, even a little bit better. I was going to say that a real drummer is never that perfect, but honestly, there are drummers that are that perfect. And then with triggers and stuff like that, they doesn't matter. Velocity is not as important as it used to be, but even there are some drummers that are like the most ridiculously consistent, hard-hitting things I've ever seen in my life. And I've actually, just locally, there are a few people in person that I've met who are that ludicrous at playing drums. So it's not necessarily a sort of a question of humanization because humans can do this. Another trick they'll do is, well, they'll do 4 hits on top and 2 on the bottom. And yeah. If you want a neat example of a fill like this, watch there's a video, it's a band called Revocation, and their track, oh damn, I forgot the name of the track. Shit. Well, really any video by Revocation, because Revocation is a really good band, but like just watch the drummer and watch the stuff they do. It's a lot of fun. So my sort of practice ground for learning how beats worked were that I spent an extremely long time accumulating drum beats, none of which I have anymore because I was an idiot. But if any of these kind of classic breaks, even like the Amen break, like if you wanted to figure out how to sequence that break, I mean, you just open it in like a slicer environment. I mean, if you don't have FL, I'm sure there's other things that do stuff like this, but like this is like a super educational look at what the beat is. We can see where all the hits is. Yes, we can see where all the hits is, and what their timing is, and that kind of thing. And we can see, when the hits happen and when the hits occur. This actually used to be how I did drum sequencing. Is I would find drum loops, slice them up, and then that'll be the samples that I would use. Because when I started producing, I was using FL4. Didn't have the FPC, and that meant that I couldn't use the piano roll writing style to do beats. Although I am perfectly fine with a sequencer, I just kind of got used to seeing this environment because I had breaks and that kind of thing. There's also a whole bunch of stuff about swing, which is where instead of everything being perfectly on the grid, you kind of lean a little bit on that, and that's pretty common. That's pretty common in like the glitch hop genres, that kind of thing. And you can do actual swing, sort of. I mean, you could use like internal swing with like the measurement there, and other DAWs also had to have like a global swing control, and that's totally fine. Or given that we're in triplets modes, this will be pretty easy. You can also just kind of manually force the note over. So instead of doing like, let's be slower than this. Yeah. Like. Putting the hit here instead of earlier, where it would probably be normally, makes it's a swung hit instead of just being. And the same can be done, for hats instead of it being like really close knit, you have kind of every other hit kind of thing. Doop, 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 doop. Pretty great stuff. Man, I really didn't have a prepared tutorial for this. I just kind of wanted this to be there so that when people were like, what did you talk about drums? Like, I've been drum sequencing, that I can just point them this video and be like, this is everything I'm going to talk about. I don't really have a formulation for this. So, I hope people found interesting stuff in there. Although, I guess if you have questions about what I've said, let me know, and I get it'll probably help me to talk about it more. And yeah, if you have any questions about this, like I said, please let me know. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and all that good stuff. And as usual, have a nice day.